So my name's Jonathan Smith, and I am from Harvey, Illinois. Actually, my youngest daughter asked me yesterday if I considered St. Louis my hometown, since I've been living here over 30 years now. And I was like, no, Harvey is my hometown, because that's where I grew up. So I went to school in School District 147. So kindergarten through 8th grade was in 147. I went to high school in Thornton, so School District 205, class of 1977, proud Wildcat. Grew up running the streets of Harvey. My father was a pastor at Bethlehem Temple. So Harvey and the south suburbs are home. So that's who I am. That's where I'm from. So in terms of where I am now, I am currently the Vice President for Diversity and Community Engagement at St. Louis University, and we're located in Midtown St. Louis, so we're really in the center of the city. And I've been at St. Louis University since 2002. I'm a faculty member in African American Studies, and since 2015, I've been our Senior Diversity and Community Engagement person. So that's a summation of the roles I occupy and where I grew up. And there's a whole lot of story in between. So I think one of the things that I think is most important is for me to talk about what it means to have grown up in Harvey, going to public school in Harvey, and for my undergraduate degree I got at Princeton University. And I think an experience I had as a high school senior is probably what has contributed the most to me doing the kind of work that I do now, even though I didn't know it at the moment. But I had just gotten accepted into Princeton, and I was going to visit, and so I had to ask all my teachers to sign this excused absence thing. And I gave it to my gym teacher, and as he signed it and said I was going to do a college visit, he said, "Where are you going?" It's like, "Where are you visiting?" I said, "I'm going to Princeton." And he said, "Ha, they'll never let you in." And I'm like, "One, you my gym teacher." It's like, you are a gym teacher. You're a gym teacher. And you're a gym teacher, so how are you going to tell me about how I'm academically prepared? And he was a gym teacher who at the same time knew, at that time I was president of the student council, I was in the top 10% of my class. He didn't know my test scores, but I had great test scores. But it was just stunning to me that he could look me in my face and say, "Ha, you'll never get in." And I was raised right, so I didn't and couldn't cuss him out at the time. But if I ever see him on Facebook, I promise you, I'm going to let him know some things about myself, and then I'm going to let him know a few things about himself. And so that was a thing that let me know that there were folks who looked at people like me and assumed that we couldn't achieve, without knowing anything about us, or even knowing. It's like he knew I was a good and involved student, and he still felt like he could laugh at what he thought was my dream, but it was at that point already my reality, right? So I think that was a thing that ultimately most influenced why I do this kind of work. The other thing is that growing up in Harvey and going to Thornton, I got real interested in Black literature, I think, by the time I was in 8th grade. And the reason I'm going to tell you all this story is that I think whatever it is you're interested in, whether it's video games, shopping, literature, movies, television, math, science, history, that there's a way, especially in higher education, to make a life out of that, right? So I've always been interested in literature, and ultimately teaching Black literature is a thing that I do most regularly. in higher ed. So as one of the academic faculty, I teach Black literature. So, so what else should I tell you? So I did my undergraduate at Princeton. Then I came to St. Louis to do a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, in poetry writing, and then I did a PhD in English literature. So that's my whole academic background. And again, when I find that man, I'm gonna let him know not only did I go to Princeton, I also went to WashU, and I got a master's degree and a PhD, and that he now has to call me Dr. Smith. So I think that's enough about me. What else should I address?
Address St. Louis University as a student of color on campus. It being an Ivy League school.
Yeah, so St. Louis University isn't the Ivy. Here in town, that's more WashU.
Yes.
Right. So at St. Louis University, we're a Jesuit Catholic institution that's still relatively selective. So we typically look for people with pretty good GPAs. One of the things we just did this year that we really did to try to increase the diversity on campus is we went test optional. So if you're not a good test taker and your grades are good, or your extracurriculars, your co-curriculars are good, you should apply to a place like St. Louis University. So St. Louis University, just to tell you who we are, as a Jesuit Catholic university, one of the things that's most important in terms of our value set is social justice. And one of the things you'll hear out of Jesuit Catholic institutions is that we want to train people to be men and women for and with others. So that's one thing we do. And then another important phrase we use is cura personalis, and that means care for the whole person. So at a school like St. Louis University, we want all of our students to be able to bring their entire self to the university. So you don't have to be Catholic, you don't have to be any particular thing, but we care for the whole person, and we do everything we can to welcome everybody. So, but we're still a predominantly white campus. And so that carries with it a lot of the stuff that normally gets carried with it. So if you're coming from an all-black high school, there's probably going to be a little bit of a culture shock. But we do have a number of things that we do to help students of color and black students on campus. For black men, we have this thing called an African American Male Scholar Initiative. We call it AIMS. And that's a group we pull young men together and help give them social, cultural, academic, and when needed financial resources and support, so they can be a support group to each other and get mentored by other black men on campus who are staff, faculty, and otherwise. We just started this year also a living learning community called Thrive that we put together for students of color. So students of color can decide to live in a residence hall on a floor where you know that the majority of the students will be students of color, the Black and Latinx students. So it's not just Black and Latinx, but it's intended to create a good cultural and social environment when you're out of the classroom, right? So for me, like the biggest cultural shock when I went away to college, I was used to being in classes with white students, but then when I went to my room after my first year roommate was a Jewish kid from Long Island who was not like me. I mean, we're still friends, but it was just like I didn't go home to black people, and I didn't go home to my mama's cooking. I had to eat what was in the cafeteria. So those things were cultural shocks. So a living learning community like Thrive we put together so that you have fewer of those shocks. We are currently putting together a similar group for women of color, an Audre Lorde scholarship initiative that's going to be a support group for women of color in the same way that our AIMS initiative is for black men.
What's the cost to attend St. Louis?
That is also a good question. I think our sticker price, and I don't keep this exactly in my head, and I'll tell you why. But our sticker price, I know, is well over 60,000. It's over 60,000. But the reason I don't keep it in my head is because we have a variety of scholarships. Every school has a sticker price, but then your financial aid gets discounted. So almost nobody. I mean, we have a very there are not almost nobody. There's some students who pay the whole freight, but probably the majority of our students don't pay anywhere near that. So we give financial aid based on need, and there's merit scholarships. So we have a presidential scholarship that gives you entire room, board, and tuition. We have a Martin Luther King scholarship, which gives you a lower amount. But again, I think we do some things that the amount of that depends on your level of need and merit. And there are other scholarships throughout. So, but we have a financial aid office that would work with people to try to make it as affordable and as accessible as possible. The majors we have majors across the board. We have an aviation major, so you can come here major in aviation and learn to be a pilot. So you can graduate as a pilot. We have majors in social justice. We do social work. We do just about everything except architecture. I think we don't have an architecture major, but we have a pre-law path. We have a pre-health path. We have a nursing school, which is very competitive. We have a nursing school, a health sciences school where you can train to be a physician's assistant, a PA, or a nurse practitioner, or an athletic trainer, or physical therapist. So we have majors across the board, including those traditional ones like English, history, African American studies. And attached to our school, we have a law school, med school, and business school. So all of those majors are possible here. And if you're really interested, and I'll say this too, because one of the reasons that I love being in St. Louis now. St. Louis since Ferguson, St. Louis has been in the news because of Mike Brown, the murder of Mike Brown. But St. Louis is a city now, if you're interested in learning how to do social justice work, you're interested in being involved in social justice work around race, gender, sexuality, economic class, housing, education. There are a few places you can go where you can learn about it in the classroom and then actually have an opportunity to be really involved in the city. So St. Louis is large enough to have a need for all of that work, but it's small enough for people to be actively involved in citywide stuff. So like Chicago's too big, New York is too big, Houston is too big, LA is too big, but there are ways to get involved as a student in St. Louis at the city level doing work that would feel both productive and educational.
So when you mentioned Mike Brown, you have 3 daughters and you have nephews. How did that affect you as an African American male? That situation that happened. How active were you in that?
So Mike Brown's death is just about directly responsible for me having the job that I have now. About 2 months after Mike Brown was killed, there was a weekend called Ferguson October when people came from Ferguson, when people came from around the nation to be involved in protests. And just about the same time that happened, there was a young man named Derek Myers who was also killed by police. That was in the city, and it was just a couple blocks. It was just less than a mile away from campus. Ultimately, that led to an occupation on campus that lasted a week. And at that time, I was a faculty member. And while Derek was killed in the neighborhood I was living in, and so I just got involved So I just got involved as a citizen. So I was going to protests in my neighborhood. And then when it happened on campus, when the occupation happened on campus, I was taking my class out. I got involved with faculty, writing letters of support. The senior administration took notice of me that week. I didn't know anybody was. I'm like, I just got to do this whether it costs me my job or not. And I got noticed by the administration. And then one of the things that came out of that was a set of accords that called for the creation of the position that I now have. And when that was on the accords, I thought, like, this is great. I'm glad we'll have this person. At the moment, I wasn't even thinking about applying for it. But long story short, applied for it, got the job. And so for me, that's why, just personally, when I walk into my office, and I'll be glad to get back into my office after COVID. And that's why I'm sitting on my porch and not on campus, because we can't have campus visitors right now. I remind myself that my position, that I have my position because two young black men shed their blood and died for it. So even more so than so I think about that for me, even more so than I think about it for my daughters and my nephews and nieces.
Lord, there's a whole bunch of questions.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, lastly, why should a student choose St. Louis University to attend college?
For me, it comes down to the fact that this is a place where you can get to be your whole self, right? So I think a lot of colleges you go to, again, because we're Jesuit Catholic, and I can spend a whole lot of time talking about the Jesuits, but because of the ways that Jesuits are interested in education, it means that when you sit in the classroom, you don't have to leave your faith outside, right? You don't have to. It's like you don't have to do anything with it. You just bring what you are, and if it matters in class discussion, you can bring that up in class discussion. If you're not a person of faith, that's also fine. If you want to pray to start a meeting on campus, that happens on a regular basis. If you don't pray to start a meeting, that happens on a regular basis. So it's a place where you actually get to be, there's not a piece of yourself that you'll have to leave at home and leave in your room here. And so when we do what we do best, it really is about you being able to be your whole person. And it's like, because I am who I am, because I am my father's son and my mother's son, I am deeply, deeply vested in the idea that we are educated for a purpose and we're here for a purpose. And so I'm a creature of the mind. I love intellectual stuff, but I appreciate working at an institution where I can talk to people about their ethical being, their spiritual being, their psychic being, and their intellectual being, and talk about all of that as their well-being. And that, and I think there are many institutions, public and private, where you can't do that. That's what we try to do. My colleagues, all of my colleagues try to do that. Faculty that I know try to do that. One of the things that I like most about St. So here's what will happen at St. Louis University. When people complain about what we do wrong, almost every time people say we're doing something wrong, they base their complaint in the mission. And that tells you about the culture. So when students say the administration is doing wrong, they tell us we're not living up to the mission, right? Faculty will say we're not living up to the mission, But every time, and so it's not about the dollars, it's not about reputation. It's like people here are concerned about are we fulfilling our mission, and when a community is concerned about mission as opposed to the other stuff, then I think you get more things right than you get wrong.
One thing Jamon, notice you have your father's hands. You have your daddy's hands.
Yes, indeed.
Yes,
I know I do. I do.
Yes.
These are all. These are nothing but Jesus' hands. Yeah.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And you know, when he died, his hands were still, it's like I would grab his old sick hands. They were just like,
Yeah.
I remember I saw a picture John posted. And I was like, that's him.
That's him. It's a big old hands. And then, and you seen that, you know, like that picture with Dr. King.
His hand is up.
Yeah, I tell people, if you want to know who my father is, look for that. There's a huge hand in the picture. Like, that's my daddy.
And I think if I remember correctly, your mom was working in Martin Luther King's office, and he walked in, and they walked in. That's how they met.
Well, actually, no, they met.
I remember that.
No, they met long before that. I didn't realize this until just about the time my father died. They met in like the 1940s.
Oh wow!
At church. Well, so the way my mother tells the story, her sister, because they all lived out in the country.
Is this the dirt road story?
Dirt road.
All over down that dirt road.
I remember that. So, and that was in the 1940s. And so her sister dragged her there because her sister wanted to see some other guys.
Some other guys? Yeah, she said that. Yeah, my sister was down there with some boy. Right?
And that's when my daddy saw her. It was like,
chased her down the road.